Hi there. I am Henrik Chulu, and I'm currently based in Berlin since a year ago, and I work independently as a writer and digital safety trainer. Until quite recently, a little under a month ago, I worked for an NGO here in Berlin called Tactical Technology Collective, but I'm back to freelancing now. Originally, I come from a background in philosophy and geography, and that kind of led me into being active in various struggles around internet freedom. And my gateway drug into doing sort of like internet activism was the copyright wars, so to speak. Copyright issues, that was, as it was for many people. The debate about content piracy led me into campaigns against internet censorship, and fights over network neutrality, and then finally into issues around security and privacy online. And for the last couple of years, specifically, privacy and security has been sort of my main focus. And in this, I've mostly been doing practice. Let me just full screen this thing. There you go. Mostly been doing practice, teaching activists, teaching journalists how to stay safer when doing what it is that they do. And besides the sort of like activisty approach, I've been doing strategic consulting for mostly NGOs and public sector institutions around a lot of stuff about digital strategies, communication, and security, and so on. And I did this. I'm just gonna grab one of these just to show what it is that we did. I did this. I had this consultancy in Denmark called Solo Beta. It still exists, but I'm out of it. But we produced this report a couple of years ago, and while it's sort of like a little bit old, it's aged decently well, and I brought a bunch of copies. So if you want one with you when you go, you can have it, and it has like super nice, pretty Creative Commons licensed pictures and so on in it. So I'd like to just like introduce why am I here? Like, how did I end up in this place? And this is thanks to Peter. So this is a new book that I was reading last week. It's Cory Doctorow's new sci-fi novel, Walk Away. And I just started reading it last week. It was like kind of the first actual sunny day in Berlin, and I was sitting on my balcony. And I kind of, it's a really good book. I really highly recommend reading it. And I kind of cheated myself out of a privileged experience because like the author, he gave me an early manuscript of it like 2 years ago, and that's what I'm reading now. And I was like, wait, I could have the privilege of having read this like 2 years ago. But back then it was called Utopia. It wasn't. Now it's called Walk Away, the actual printing. And then I was reading it on the balcony in the sun, and it's this sort of like Internet of Things, smart city, sort of utopian dystopia or dystopian utopia. It's kind of like hard to tell. So I was thinking like what is actually going on? It's very much like a political political science treatise on the economics of abundance. What happens when we have when everyone has access to everything, and what is the human response to catastrophes and stuff like that. And he's presenting this world where everything is connected and where we have basically access to everything. And with that entails a lot of like really nice things because we're really used to this by now with information. But imagine the sort of abundance of the internet, but like transposed out into the real world of like resources. And then while I was reading it, I got to think like, what would it take for me to actually engage in a world where I could sort of like Google, I don't know, like Google a car and then have it come here and like take me somewhere else, like as an example, like what would have me trust the system enough to work in a way that this car would not like drive off a cliff, basically. This was where I was saying like, what is the utopia that would make me sort of actually engage with a connected world? And that that and a bunch of coffee induced me to tweet out what Peter then reacted to and was like, hey, can you come speak with us for this thing? And that I'll get back to you with at the end of the talk, because it's not like, it was a kind of a Twitter thread, but it's not like half an hour worth of talking. So I'll try and give you some context for that idea that I presented on Twitter that Peter liked. So before we get to that, I'd like to talk a little bit about smart cities. So you're all from Berlin, I guess, or at least live here, and so you're probably not unfamiliar with the debate around gentrification here, like how people are being like the local communities are being undermined, people being pushed out of their neighborhoods and so on. And this is like an idea to have in mind when we're talking about smart cities, because in academia, as well as in the real world, there's this debate about the concept of rights to the city, and looking at the city as a space of political conflict. And this is beginning to have digital counterpoints. So it's not just about like space and space usage, it's also about access to data and who controls the sensors that are built into the environment and so on. And I think here there's a lot to be learned by designers, by policymakers, and so on, from the urban planning traditions. And there's one specific planner that I had in mind, which is Christopher Alexander, who invented the idea of pattern languages. And basically he was like inventing this idea of like, we need to look at like, what are people actually doing? Why do cities look like they do, like after, years and thousands of years iterations, medieval cities came to look in a specific way for a reason. And he was sort of directing this critique both at like super like visionary utopian planners that designed impossible cities, but also like super boring, visionless, bean counting, economists designing cities for efficiency. Because he saw both as like anti-human and asocial. And his concept of a pattern language was a way of putting human experience at the center of design, urban design or otherwise, and also actually became part of the theoretical underpinnings of software development. And then I'd like to introduce you to like a concept that an idea that I think might be sort of unsettling, but like disruption is not necessarily a good thing, and open source is not necessarily helping. So this is an example of why. So this is a quote from Mikhail Kalashnikov. Before attempting to create something new, it is vital to have a good appreciation of everything that already exists in the field. And this is like the most widely available weapon system in the world. It's extremely reliable. You can shoot it even if it's been submerged in water, if it's been buried in mud. It's super easy to strip down and clean. It's very, very reliable. But it's not a very good rifle. Like it's not really, really good at what it's supposed to do, which is kill people. But it's like especially not compared to like the guns that are produced in the U.S. and so on, or like Belgium or Sweden or whatever. And the reason that it's so widespread and so popular, so to speak, is not because Mikhail Kalashnikov was a super brilliant designer. It's about the costs of production. A brand new model of this out of a Russian factory costs about the same as a new iPhone. And the cheapest Chinese knockoff you can buy on a market somewhere in Africa costs about the cheapest sort of like feature phone you can buy in like a supermarket. That's the sort of price range of this thing. And the reason for this is just about patents and trademarks and like design patterns and so on. Because when it was released, when it was designed, the Soviet Union basically gave it for free, the design patterns, to all their client nations around the world. All the client states could produce it without having to pay license fees to the Soviet Union or Kalashnikov. So this is like a really sort of prime example of like open source and disruption. Like this disrupted the gun market completely, right? And I think we can see that when we look at open source in the digital world, we are seeing the same kind of thing. So these stats might be a little bit off because I didn't have time to look them up, but I still think they're sort of like generally true. So first of all, like 99.7% of all the world's supercomputers run Linux. That's like all the computers. Most of the servers connected to the internet, like basically all the web servers we're using are running some kind of open source system, and most web users use an open source browser, either Chrome or Firefox, and most smartphones in the world run on community developed software, which is the Android operating system. And so this open source production model has become the complete cornerstone of this connected world that we're living in. One of the things it does is it makes it possible to take, we were just talking about that before, it's possible to take in ideas from outside the institutional boundaries of the organization that produces the content or the software or the Internet of Thing, whatever. And social tools has made this possible. In the beginning, like email lists and so on, and now we have like GitHub. And the organizational overhead of producing basically anything today is just falling through the floor in most fields, actually. And then, of course, there's the GNU public license or any open source license, which has made it possible to actually to enforce legal compliance across like the market. So even if you're releasing something on open source, you can keep it free and open, so to speak, unless it's like the CIA that copies your software, the NSA, basically. Otherwise, like this sort of combination of like social tools and like a production model and a license, that's like the triumvirate of things that are usually pointed to and saying like, why is open source successful? Let's look at those three. But I think besides that, there's like the quality of the code is good. It works. Like I'm running a Linux machine here. The reason we can see this picture is because it works. It's not breaking down. But I think it's a necessary condition. Like code quality is a necessary condition of open source success, but it's not a sufficient condition. I think another condition is what I was referring to before, which is that it's free. Like it works and it drives down costs. So when you look at like the economics of disruption, what is usually referred to is not like some super innovative new thing that disrupts the market. It's usually someone doing something much cheaper than the best thing out there. So it's not about actually free as in speech that Richard Stallman would like. It's about the free as in beer that is kind of pushing it. And so like a minimally functional product wins, but like that is cheap wins over like a highly innovative sort of high-end design. And that's why we have Linux on all the web servers, basically. And it's not because it works better than a closed source product. It's because it works for free if you discount the wages. So for example, like the iPhone is super innovative. It was in the beginning especially. But Android was disruptive because you can basically produce an Android phone that is dirt cheap. And this has produced some interesting privacy and security trade-offs, which I would have balked at completely a couple of years ago when I was still sort of like evangelizing open source and being like super idealistic. I used to believe this idea that all bugs are shallow if you have enough eyeballs on them. Like if enough people look through the code, all the sort of terrible security flaws in the software will just like evaporate like magically. But then shell shock happened, and then Heartbleed happened, and that's shell shock was basically an almost 20-year-old vulnerability basically in the core of how Linux works. It was designed, or like it was basically implemented in all the software before the web, before even Linux was developed, and which would allow remote code execution on machines. And then there's Heartbleed, which was basically an infrastructure-wide vulnerability in the way that we encrypt things when we're sending it over the internet. So I used to be this open source evangelizer. Now I'm a little bit more pragmatic, because when you look at the sort of general field, 97% of all malware for phones, for smartphones, is targeting Android, the open source system. So it turns out that it's not really about having a community that supports your product. And that like all the vulnerabilities dissipate when all the eyeballs look at the code. It's like in practice, having a community that constantly attacks your system is much better. So the iPhone is as secure as it is today, not because Apple is really good at designing, but because they have had like a shit ton of people trying to crack the iPhone in order to jailbreak it. Like in order to open it up, they've been having just attack after attack after attack. So now we have a phone that's super duper secure because of the jailbreaking community, which is basically like a hobby community by now, but in the beginning it was actual people wanting to get more value out of the iPhone. And that means that today, while you can basically buy malware on the internet for an Android phone that people will use to sort of like stalk their ex-partners or like stalkerware, is super cheap. But in order to remotely break into an iPhone, it will cost you $1 million. So open source won't save you. It does have value, however. So I'm not like discarding it completely. It's not worse. It's not better. It's not even like a necessary or sufficient condition for secure systems, because security is much more contextual. It's much more relational. It's not about the thing itself. But it gives you a route of escape, because today we are kind of living this neo-feudal world. Bruce Schneier, the renowned security expert, talks about like how we're basically back to feudalism. We're back to this idea of like everyone living in a fiefdom where like there's the master Zuckerberg and there's the master like Sergey and Larry and Sergey, yeah. And there's like Tim Cook and there's Jeff Bezos and so on. There's like our feudal masters that control these huge ecosystems of like the big five: Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, and Google. Yes, thank you. And it's almost like a rhyme. But he's saying like we're living inside these ecosystems. We can it's possible to build your own open source world outside of all these ecosystems, but we're using them because of the security that it affords us. Like if you're running your own mail server, it will break down at some point. If you're like trying and run your own document cloud to sort of do internal documentation in your organization, it's like a hassle. Like we're using it because it works, it's reliable. Security is not just about confidentiality or about like anonymity. It's also about like actually having stuff that works so you can do whatever it is that you do. So this is kind of what open source has. It has this prefigurative utopian escape hatch. There's like, oh, if Twitter breaks down or goes bankrupt, we can all go to Mastodon. We can all use like the open federated systems out there. But we don't now because Twitter is kind of this sort of like, we're already there, so let's just use that, right? So it's not that there aren't alternatives to this feudal world. It's just that most people are more secure using stuff that is like, the Gmail security team is better than my sort of network configuration skills, basically. So that's why people use Gmail. So most people, some people will be like using the system and then like have an Android phone. Or they'll be using these systems and really like some weird corner of the internet that like GitHub that they use for fun. But there are so few people that are willing to go full vegetarian or vegan for open source systems. And I don't think necessarily that is something that we should do. I really like the fact that there's an escape hatch from like this corporate feudal system that we're living in. But how did we end up there? In the beginning of space, like look at these guys, like they're amazing, right? Going into space. In the beginning of space exploration, we had this dream of like a global future, and humanity would expand through the solar system, and science would solve all our social problems and so on. But in reality, we got like intercontinental ballistic missiles, and we got like spy satellites looking at us from orbit and so on. So it was like reality and like the utopian dream and the reality of like what we actually built was like very different, right? And the same thing with the internet. Like we had this idea just like still 10 years ago, I think, especially in the 90s, this idea of like connected globe where everyone could talk to everyone and like exercise their freedom of expression without censorship and association without like being like targeted, and you could get access to all the information and you could maintain your privacy because everyone is anonymous on the internet. Like no one knows you're a dog on the internet, and things turned out a little bit different. It turns out that I forgot to put a slide in there. That is like you have this I think from 67 this sort of comparison of centralized, decentralized, and distributed systems. Where a centralized system, you have like one central node that points out to all the different like receiver nodes. That's like television or radio. Then you have like decentralized systems that have like smaller nodes out, like they're all connected, but you have like smaller nodes distributing out into to the edges. And then you have this distributed system where basically everything is connected to everything else. But it turns out that it's really easy to create hierarchies and centralization out of distributed or decentralized systems. But it's really hard to go the other way around. Once you have like a centralized system, decentralizing takes like a shit ton of effort. It really sort of drives, it takes a lot of energy to imagine trying to take like television networks and trying to build the internet out of it, rather than taking the internet and building Netflix. It's kind of that, like it's really easy once you get the users to have the network effect drive centralization. And one of the things that this means is that design-wise, form doesn't follow function anymore. There's this dictum that like a thing should resemble like the kind of function that it has. You should be able to tell by looking at it what's the purpose of the, like you look at the hammer, you can sort of be like, I think this is for nails, right? When you look at like Google Home, what is the purpose of the Google Home? Like what, not like why do you have it, but like when you look at it, it's like what is the function of that thing? It's really, really hard to tell. But even like just the telephone, like the purpose, this is a really, really old mobile telephone. It's from the DDR and is used to sort of do like network network maintenance stuff. So you plug it into the wires and you'll be like, hey, it works, and then you plug it out. So it's a mobile telephone. But it's kind of like it does that one thing. But now telephone is basically a lot of other things. It's a tracker. It's like a health meter. It's a way for the government to be able to know where everyone is all like at every single moment in time and so on. It's like it has a lot of functions that you wouldn't be able to tell by just looking at it, right? I have a phone here, invisible phone. Same thing like the internet. It used to be a network where the purpose was to distribute information, distribute data as efficiently as possible from point to point, end to end. Like, but today it's more like a network that gathers up information about us. Where every time we send an email or we like access a web page or chat on like Facebook chat or whatever, we are giving away information that is collected up, and that's basically the business model of the internet. That is surveillance. And that's because of economics, because everything is being financed, and they need more and more information to target the ads and so on. So this big racket going on of ad tech driving basically every profitable like service out there. So that's basically how we ended up with this. And this gives us some like problems around security, around privacy, and so on. But the thing is, we had like decent privacy controls or privacy software already like 20 years ago. We had the crypto wars in the 90s where there was this fight over whether cryptographic software should be treated as software, like free speech, or weapons, like ammunition. It was classified in the US as ammunition. And so you couldn't export it to certain other countries and so on. And there was like a big fight that was won by the sort of freedom of speech advocates that made it clear that software is speech. It's not a weapon. And since then, we had like internet banking and e-commerce and so on that would not be possible if you had if you didn't have strong cryptography. And at the same time, like for an organization, data privacy is the condition of user trust. This is being after the especially the Snowden revelations, that is something that is like very contentious now. Like, do you trust Google with your data now that you know that like a signals intelligence agency has direct access to their servers? That's like up to Google to sort of make decisions about, right? So there's like some hidden, or at least like only beginning demand for privacy-conscious, privacy-supporting services. And most companies have started to realize this, and sort of like either because of user demand or because like compliance issues with data protection laws, or like starting to sort of drive in that direction. But when you look at it, even the like good guys that are trying, we're making like pinky promises. We're saying we won't like steal your data. We won't use it for bad things, but there's not that much actual privacy by design or privacy by default. It's all sort of privacy because I promise, pinky promise that I won't sell you out. So this is of course also in the world of IoT. And getting back to sort of like hard security, high-risk actors like human rights defenders or activists or journalists in repressive regimes, digital security, privacy, and so on is never about the data. It's not about the actual information. For most people, it's about their lives, and it's about the well-being of their friends, families, and so on. And again, with the Internet of Things, I think digital security becomes much more directly about other things than the actual data that the sensors produce, and much more about the things that they're connected to. Like there's so many ways, like a connected home or a connected body or a connected city can be weaponized against itself. Like it's not about like stealing data. It's about like making things do like I have a really dumb toaster at home. It's a shitty toaster, but at least no one will hack into it and like set my house on fire. So there's that, like, again, like physical security is becoming more and more like part of the digital security. And again, like when I hear people talking about Internet of Things and Internet of like the smart city, I look at what actual like big tech firms outside of the big five are building for police departments. So I'm going to show you a little video. It's a demonstration video from Hitachi. Oh, you're not supposed to see that, sorry. It's a demonstration video from Hitachi from a system that they call Visualization Suite. I hope this is working. This mouse is super finicky.
So if I want to view a camera, it's a very simple process. I just click on it once, and it'll start a small display. And what you'll notice is that you actually won't notice is that this is working off of a third-party system. So we have about 3 or 4 different source video management systems that we're actually showing you in this demonstration, but they all interact, or the user interacts with any of these in the same manner, independent of where that actual video system resides. And that's the beauty of the gateway device, which enables that. So if I wanted to know where this is, or what's the context of this, I could actually switch over here to a street view, and then I can get the context of this camera location. I can also drill down into this camera and get a larger view. I can even go back in time and play back. So we have other cameras here as well. Now where it gets interesting is that when you start correlating the custom events with the cameras. So for instance, if I wanted to see my CAD events, these are my 911 calls, I can overlay that event data on the map. Same thing with gunshot sensors. So I can start to see this visual correlation of events that are occurring alongside my stationary objects, and even Twitter feeds. So here in this case, I have a Twitter feed with someone tweeted about the police in Chinatown, a motorcade in Chinatown, just one example. But I could come back and you'll notice that I had some gunshot sensors, so I could drill down into one particular camera here that's close by these events that have occurred, this gunshot. And the great thing is if I want to go back in time, I can drill down and click on the Archive tab. And what you'll notice here is that it's loading the events which are nearby that camera.
Okay, this is a demonstration video. This is like where they're presenting their like very well-designed smart city. It's called predictive policing system that is marketed to police departments. And I think this is something that we as
so for instance,
when we're talking about security, a lot of people don't really have a threat model. They don't really have like, this is what I'm worried of, like the actual thing that I'm worried about. Most people, when we're talking about privacy, is like, oh, I have data that is valuable, but some people actually have threats. So if you're living in a black or brown community in the US, you're over-policed, you're much likelier to get arrested on some charge that you have to plead guilty to, otherwise basically be in jail until you can be in front of a judge. And otherwise you like, so you plead guilty and then you get released, but then you have to go to jail at some other time for like a lesser sentence and so on. So like being in this system, like thinking about security, you need to think about what are the actual user's risks. So that's why I put like your threat model is not my threat model. And that goes for everyone. So I think you kind of got into this idea of like you need to put yourself outside of your own bubble. That means like both like gender, ethnically, sexual orientation, occupation, like all these things. In order to actually think about security, you need to sort of think much broader than your own situation when you're designing stuff like this. And this is something Silicon Valley is crazy bad at. Like there's no one really doing this in any good way. So that was kind of the background for my tweet. That was like, when would I trust something that is like, when you have these kind of systems that I just showed you that are being built, like you have Palantir doing it, you have Hitachi, every big sort of data production or the data analysis company is building some kind of predictive policing system. And if you have open data coming out of your internet connected device, that will be hooked up to like a policing map at some point, right? So when will I, as like personally, feel safe around internets of things? I don't know. And this is kind of what I came up with. So I was like, utopian ideals. That would be an information infrastructure that you can trust in the same way that you trust waterworks in a functional social democracy. So I'm from a social democracy. I think it used to be very functional, but still I trust, like if I'm going to Copenhagen, I open the tap and I drink a glass of water, I'm pretty sure that it's not poison. I'm like 99.99999% sure that it's not. There's been cases, very special cases where waterworks have been polluted or where like a pipe broke somewhere and then, you know, sewage water came out of the tap. But it's like super rare. It's like, it's more likely that I'll get run over by a car. So in general, I trust that tap water is not poison, whereas I don't trust the media. I don't trust like ISPs or telcos or like the web hosts or the internet companies and so on with my data. I don't even trust the regulators because of the revolving door that goes around like Google and then the State Department and then back to Google and then into some other ministry or department. There's a lot of like bad incentives. There's revolving doors. There's self-regulation. In Denmark, network neutrality is based on self-regulations by the telcos, which is crazy. And there's especially no security expertise like widespread in any of these organizations, except like the really big ones, which is why I'd rather use Gmail than set up my own server, basically. But I trust tap water because it's like 100 years old, evidence-based public goods institution that, and it's not like, I wrote this on Twitter, not a crap factory disguised as a cake factory, which I think most of like Silicon Valley companies are. So unless someone else comes up with a better mental model, I think drinking water is a really good metaphor or yardstick by which to measure information infrastructure health. So in the same way as I believe like water is a human right, I also believe that information is a human right. And by that I mean clean, drinkable water and not like sewage water. And the same way by information need, I mean like institutionally transparent, user private, neutrally networked, uncensored information and not sewage. So those are the utopian ideals. It's not there at all. We're like hardly at the place where we like information history-wise. We're hardly in the place where we're starting to separate drinking water and sewage. That's like for infrastructure, like physical infrastructure, about 100 years ago, maybe 200 years ago, someone was like, maybe we shouldn't drink where we shit. That's where we are at now. Like people are saying, like, let's build secure systems, and I think that's kind of the push now. Is like we're starting to figure out, like maybe if we wash our hands and like boil the water, we'll be safe in certain sectors. Like journalists know that like data security is important to protect their sources. Activists know that repressive governments will like dig through their emails or like do phishing attacks against them and so on. But like for a general population, we're not there yet at all. So how do we get there? How much time do I have? I can just go on forever. How do we get there? This is like a pre-Wright brothers flying machine patent. This is not where we are at with like digital technology. We're like a little bit, we're like more at the Wright brothers. But so there are two things that I think are necessary to just advance to a step where we're like, oh, let's separate the two things. And that is literacy on the one hand and liability. So start with liability. In a year ago, a Danish programmer called Paul Henrik said in a talk called Things We Haven't Ruined with Software Yet, that there are only two things on the market that have no product liability whatsoever. One is software. Whatever happened to your data or to your connected toaster, it will not be the software vendor's fault. It will never be the software vendor's fault. If, let's say, a machine learning enabled connected toaster sets fire to your house, it's because its algorithm misconstrued some data coming in and said like, oh, we need to turn the heat extra up or whatever. You can't take the coder to court and say like, you burned down my house. You can maybe take the toaster producer to court. And the other non-liable product category is religion. And that's wholly unaccountable for the promises that it makes. So on that note, like I would hate to take personal safety or like digital safety on faith. And the other sort of aspect of that is like if we're living in a world where we don't have transparent technologies, we're going to have to take our like cybersecurity risks on a sort of demonology where we have to like, I wonder what this machine thinks is going on, and then I'll do certain things to sort of influence the algorithm, and then like maybe it'll do the right thing. So there's be like a weird demon inside the car or inside your house, and you have to sort of placate it doing certain things in order to get what you want. That's also super weird, and I don't want that. So that's the one thing, and the other thing is literacy. So this has become kind of the focus on when I do security trainings now, is not really teaching people how to encrypt their email or how to do super like complicated technical things. It's more about teaching them how does the internet work? How does a phone track your location? How does your computer get infected with malware? Like how does the basics of the infrastructure actually work? Because when you know that, you can make much better decisions about your personal safety, regardless of your context and circumstances. So in this thing, which one of the things that I think has aged a bit is that we wrote that computer programming is the single most important skill that anyone can learn. Bam. I still think it's super important, but I don't think everyone should learn to program computers. I think everyone needs to learn how computers work. And because like the way software works is that it's not like a given. It's like a computer program goes line by line by line, and each line is a decision that some engineer or designer or both made on behalf of a user. Hopefully with user input, but it's still someone made the decision, and that decision has to be more and more transparent. Because otherwise, we are living in someone else's utopia, and that's not usually a utopia. Um, so with that, how to do that is a completely different talk. So I'd just like to say like thanks for having me, and I still think that we can make like an amazing infrastructure, digital infrastructure. We just need to like push on literacy and liability, I think. Thanks.